At first glance, he looked like a man who didn't belong. Torn boots, heavy beard, eyes tired beyond years. He walked into a small-town diner like a shadow, unnoticed, unwelcomed, and nearly turned away. But what no one realized in that moment was that this quiet old man once led soldiers through hell, that under the dirt and silence was a warrior who had stared down death, not once, but dozens of times. A veteran decorated with medals few even survived to receive. A man who had given everything to his country and received nothing in return, until one morning a waitress saw something in his backpack, and everything changed. This is not just a story about war. It's not about medals or uniforms. It's about what happens when the country forgets its heroes and what it means when a town finally remembers. It's about silence, dignity, ghosts that don't haunt, but simply sit and wait to be seen. You're about to witness a story that feels too powerful to be fiction, but too forgotten to be real. A story of one man, one booth, and one quiet act that lit a spark of respect through an entire town. By the end, you'll ask yourself one question. How many others are still out there, waiting to be seen? Let's begin. The clock on the diner. Wall blinked 7:41 a.m. when he walked through the door. Rain tapped gently on the glass, fog crept across the windows, and the dim yellow bulbs hanging from the ceiling cast long shadows over the cracked linoleum floor. It was one of those mornings where the cold made everything feel slower, older, heavier. The kind of morning where people kept their heads down and their coffee hot. Emily didn't look up at first. She was too busy wiping down tables and fighting, with the busted coffee machine behind the counter. It was her second week on the job, and she was already tired of the routine, tired of the regulars, and definitely tired of being up before the sun. But the sound that came next wasn't routine. It wasn't loud, but it cut through the space like a whisper in a church. The little bell above the door gave a half-hearted chime as a tall, slouched figure stepped inside. He looked like time had forgotten him. His beard was thick and wild, streaked with white and gray, reaching halfway down his chest. His coat, once military green, was now a dull mix of mud and dust. His boots were old, cracked, soaked from the rain, and left faint prints behind him as he limped forward using a carved wooden cane. No one said a word. Heads turned, then turned back just as quickly. In places like this, no one wants to see the invisible. Emily finally looked up, and her face tensed immediately. She hated this part, the awkward part, the part where someone clearly didn't belong and she had to decide whether to say something. She thought about the manager, who always warned her to keep things clean, keep things safe, don't let people hang around. She took a breath, smoothed her apron, and stepped out from behind the counter. She approached carefully, trying not to seem harsh. Her voice came out lighter than she meant it to. "Sir, you need to order something if you're going to stay here. That's our policy." The old man didn't flinch. He stood there, silent, dripping onto the floor, then nodded once. His hand moved slowly to his side as he crouched slightly and pulled out an old leather wallet from a backpack that looked like it had been to war and back. Coffee. Just coffee. His voice was gravel wrapped in smoke, low and worn like an old engine, refusing to quit. Black. No sugar. Emily blinked, surprised he had money. She nodded, mumbled something like sure, and walked back to the counter. Her hands moved automatically, grab the mug, pour the coffee, drop it on the counter. But her eyes kept drifting back. There was something in the way he moved. Not just slow, deliberate, like every motion had weight, like he had to calculate every step, not because of weakness, but because he'd been carrying something far heavier than age. The man took his coffee without a word and sat down at the corner booth by the window. He moved carefully, with the kind of stiffness you don't get from sleeping rough. This was old injury stiffness, bone deep. He set the mug down, then placed the backpack beside him, keeping one hand resting on it like it held something worth protecting. He didn't drink right away. Just sat there, staring out the fogged glass, steam rising from the cup. In the back of the diner, one man noticed. Frank Morales, a retired Marine, had been coming to this place every morning for the last 11 years. He knew the faces, he knew the type. And this man? He wasn't just a vagrant. Frank saw the boots first, old military issue. Then the cane, hand-carved, not store-bought. Then the eyes. Those were soldier eyes. Quiet, scanning, haunted. He said nothing, just kept watching. Emily hovered near the register, arms crossed, watching too. Not in judgment now, but in curiosity. There was something off about this man, but not in the way she first thought. He wasn't dangerous. He wasn't loud. But he didn't seem lost either. He seemed like he had come here for a reason. The minutes passed. No one else came in. The rain thickened. Emily started wiping down tables again, trying to pretend she wasn't glancing back every 20 seconds. At one point, the man reached down to open his backpack, maybe for a napkin, maybe for nothing at all. What spilled out changed everything. Folder tumbled open, papers sliding across the table. Among them, catching the low morning light, were medals. Real ones, heavy ones, a silver star still in its case, a purple heart, the ribbon slightly torn, and something else, an old black and white photo of young men in uniform, muddy and grinning in a foreign jungle. Emily froze mid-step. Her stomach turned as heat flushed her cheeks. She took a step back, like she'd just interrupted a funeral. She hadn't said a word to him since that first moment, but suddenly she couldn't breathe. This wasn't a random stranger. This wasn't some drifter. This was someone who had bled for something. Frank stood up slowly. He didn't limp, didn't rush. He walked across the diner with a gravity that made Emily's throat tighten. When he reached the booth, he didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He just nodded and said, "Army?" The old man looked up, eyes squinting slightly. "5th Infantry, Vietnam." "You?" Frank's mouth twitched into something close to a smile. "2nd Marines. Iraq. Desert Storm. We never crossed paths. But damn, we might have been in the same hell." The two men stared at each other for a long second. No handshake, no salute. Just a silent agreement between soldiers who knew what the world didn't. Then Frank turned to Emily. His voice was low but sharp. "You gave him that coffee?" She nodded quickly. "Yeah. I mean, he paid for it." Frank cut her off gently. "Then I suggest you refill it. On the house." She did. That was the first morning anyone in that town noticed the old man with the beard. But for Sam Harris, it was just another day of trying not to be seen. He had walked through rain, through silence, through a country that barely remembered him. But for one quiet moment, over black coffee and warm silence, someone finally did. Sam Harris didn't come back the next day, or the next week. The diner returned to normal like nothing had happened. The usual regulars filled the booths, farmers, and truckers talking sports and weather, and Emily slipped right back into her routine. But something lingered in the air, a kind of unfinished question. She found herself looking toward that corner booth every morning, as if expecting to see the shape of a man who moved like a shadow and smelled like old battles and rain. She didn't even know why it bothered her. Maybe it was the medals. Maybe it was the way Frank had stood up so quick, no hesitation, like he'd recognized something sacred. Or maybe it was the way the old man's eyes had held hers for just a second, not in anger, not in pain, just deep, deep, like silence before a storm. Emily didn't come from a military family. She didn't know about deployments or ranks or ribbons, but she knew shame when it sat in her chest like a cold rock, and she hadn't stopped thinking about the way. She almost sent him away. Then one morning, 10 days later, the bell above the door chimed again. Same time. Same gray light outside. Same empty booth in the corner, and there he was. Sam walked slower this time. He looked thinner, paler. But the beard was still there, still wild and proud, and the cane still tapped out that careful rhythm, with each step. He didn't make eye contact, didn't speak. Just moved to the same booth, set down the same backpack, and waited. Emily didn't hesitate. She poured a fresh cup of coffee, added a small plate with toast and jam, and walked it over without a word. Sam nodded once, his lips pressed in a faint line, and took the cup in both hands like it was gold. That moment might have lasted a heartbeat, or an hour. It didn't matter. She didn't ask anything. Didn't need to. Frank showed up 20 minutes later. When he saw Sam sitting there again, something in his face changed. He walked over, not like an old friend, but like a fellow soldier returning to formation. They didn't shake hands. They didn't swap stories. They just talked in short sentences, things only men like them could understand. Emily listened from a distance, catching fragments. Jungle, friendly fire, dust off, brothers in arms. None of it made full sense to her, but it all felt real, raw, important. It became a routine. Every few days, Sam would return, always around the same time, always quiet. Emily started bringing him the same breakfast, no charge. Frank would stop by if he could. Sometimes they'd talk. Sometimes they wouldn't. But Sam always sat at that booth with his backpack by his side, like it held everything left that mattered. One morning, it rained hard. Harder than usual. Thunder cracked through the sky and the power flickered once, then held steady. Sam didn't show up that day, or the next. A week passed. Emily felt her chest tighten each time the door opened and it wasn't him. She didn't realize how much she looked forward to his presence until it was gone again. Frank noticed, too. When he came in and saw the empty booth, he didn't say much. Just looked out the window a long time, then left his coffee unfinished. It wasn't until the second week that they heard anything. The town had a small shelter 3 blocks down, just a few beds and a nurse who worked overtime for almost no pay. One of the regulars mentioned seeing Sam there, said he looked sick, said he barely spoke. Emily left mid-shift and walked over without thinking. When she saw him, she almost didn't recognize him. He was lying on a cot near the back, blanket pulled over his chest, beard even more unkempt, eyes closed. But the cane was beside him, and the backpack was tucked under his arm like a shield. The nurse said it was pneumonia, maybe worse. Exposure, malnutrition. He'd refused to go to the hospital, refused VA assistance, refused everything except a cup of coffee and a quiet corner to rest. Emily sat beside him for a long time. He didn't wake up. She didn't try to wake him. Just sat. There, feeling that same shame press down on her again, deeper now. This wasn't just a man. This was someone who had carried the weight for everyone else, and now he was slipping through the cracks. Forgotten. She went back to the diner and told Frank. His jaw tightened. He didn't speak right away, just nodded. Once, left a 20 on the table and walked out. The next day, Sam was gone from the shelter. No one knew where he went. Emily checked the alleys, the church steps, even the edge of town where the old rail yard stood rusting and silent. Nothing. But on the third day, when she opened the diner at 6:30 sharp, the booth wasn't empty. Sam was there. He looked weaker but cleaner. Someone had helped him wash. His beard was tied back with a rubber band. His eyes were sunken but alert. He gave her the faintest smile when she brought the coffee. Emily didn't speak, just set it down gently and placed a hand on the table for a second before walking away. Frank arrived later, slower than usual. When he saw Sam, he sat down without a word. The two men talked low and slow, words drifting like smoke in the quiet morning air. This time, Emily heard one phrase that stuck with her. "I just didn't want to be forgotten." Sam said it softly. Not to anyone in particular. Not as a complaint, just as a fact. Like saying it out loud made it real. Frank reached across the table and tapped the cane. Not forgotten, brother. Not on my watch. The cold snap that week made everything brittle. The sidewalks cracked under boot heels, and frost clung to windows, like spider webs. Inside the diner, the warmth barely held, even with the heaters going full blast. Emily kept the coffee flowing and the plates hot, but her eyes kept drifting to the booth by the window. Sam was becoming part of the rhythm now, not just a customer, not even a friend, but a fixture. Like the bell above the door, or the way the sun hit the floor at 8:10 every morning. His silence wasn't awkward anymore. It was expected. But there were days his silence deepened. Days. He stared out the window like he was watching something no one else could see. His fingers would tighten around the handle of his mug. His eyes would flicker like old film reels, grainy and full of things best left unspoken. Frank noticed it, too. He'd sit across from him and not say a word. Just let the man drift through whatever memory was clawing its way to the surface. They didn't call it flashbacks. They didn't name it. They just let it pass. One morning, Emily walked by and saw a photo on the table. Sam didn't notice her glance. It was a snapshot. Curled at the edges, black and white. 5 young men in full combat gear caked in mud, rifles slung across their chests, all smiling like fools. Sam was in the middle, almost unrecognizable. Without the beard, eyes bright, shoulders square. She wanted to ask who they were. She didn't. Something told her not to. Instead, she refilled his cup and moved on. Later that week, a man came in wearing a suit that looked too expensive for this part of town. His haircut screamed military, but his posture screamed bureaucracy. He walked right up to Sam's booth, without asking. Sam didn't look up. The man sat anyway. Emily watched from behind the counter, her gut tightening. The conversation was low, tense. She couldn't hear every word but caught fragments. Discharge, records, case file, the word benefits came up, followed by a bitter laugh from Sam. The man finally stood, dropped a card on the table, and left without a goodbye. Sam didn't touch the card, just looked at it for a long time, then slipped it into his backpack without a word. Frank came in 10 minutes later. When Sam told him about the visit, he tensed, said he'd had his share of those types, said they show up with words like thank you and forms that lead nowhere. Said sometimes the system forgets the people who built it. Sam didn't respond. He just took another sip of coffee and stared out the window again. Emily couldn't stop thinking about it. That night, she searched Sam's name. She found it, buried in old records, half-faded scans of commendations and citations. Articles from the 70s and 90s. A heroic rescue under fire, a failed VA appeal, a missing persons report from 2 years ago filed by no one. Her chest ached reading it all. She printed some of it and kept the papers in her apron pocket the next day. She didn't show him. She just wanted to carry a piece of his truth in case he ever needed it. One Friday, Sam didn't come in. Saturday neither. Sunday morning, the booth stayed empty. By Monday, Emily couldn't hide her worry. She tried the shelter again. No record. Called a contact at the clinic. Nothing. Frank went looking, walking blocks he hadn't in years, checking alleyways, underpasses, old hangouts. He came back with nothing but silence. Emily opened the drawer under the counter and pulled out the stack of papers she'd printed. She handed them to Frank without a word. He read them slowly. When he finished, he folded them, put them in his pocket, and said one sentence: "We owe him." That night, Frank made calls. The kind of calls only someone with real rank could still make. People who owed favors picked up. Files got reopened. An old friend with a badge started asking questions. By morning, they had a lead, an old storage unit on the edge of town. It wasn't listed under Sam's name, but the cane carving matched a symbol on the lease. Frank and Emily drove out together. They found the manager, a quiet man with tired eyes, who said someone had been coming and going for months, always after dark, always alone. Said he hadn't seen him in a week. They found Sam inside, lying on an old army cot wrapped in a wool blanket. He was alive, but barely. The air was cold, the light dim. His backpack was under his arm, metal still inside, untouched. He opened his eyes when he heard Frank's voice. Didn't speak. Just nodded once like he was sorry they'd found him. Frank didn't scold him. Emily didn't cry. They just sat there for a while. Then, quietly, Frank picked him up. The old soldier didn't resist, didn't argue. He let himself be carried. Just this once. Back at the diner, they made up a spot for him in the back room. Not charity, not pity, just warmth, real warmth. Emily brought his coffee. Frank brought stories. For the first time, Sam told a few of his own. Not all, just a few. Enough. The booth by the window stayed empty, not out of loss. Out of respect, the back room of the diner wasn't fancy. Just an old supply closet with a single cot, a space heater, and a coat rack Emily repurposed to hold Sam's backpack and cane. But to him, it felt like a palace. There was warmth, real warmth, not just from the air, but from the people. Every morning he woke to the smell of fresh coffee and something sweet on the griddle. Emily would knock once, wait, then bring in breakfast without a word. Sam always sat up slowly, shoulders stiff, legs heavy, and thanked her with a nod. She never pressed him to talk. She just stayed a few minutes longer each day, sometimes asking about the photo of the 5 men, sometimes not. One morning, he spoke first. His voice was slow, quieter than usual. Their names were Ray, Booker, Luis, and Kenny. I was the oldest by 2 years. We lost Kenny on day 3. He said it like a fact, like someone talking about the weather. Emily just listened. Her eyes stayed on the mug in her hands, but her attention never left him. Sam went on to tell her how they'd been pinned down behind a rock wall for 16 hours with no air support. How Ray kept cracking jokes even after his leg was gone. How he carried Booker when he couldn't feel his arms. And how, after the last bullet stopped flying, there was only him left to count them. Frank heard about it later from Emily. He didn't ask Sam directly. He didn't need to. He'd lived his own versions. Instead, he sat beside the cot one night and pulled out a folded flag from a worn plastic case. "This was my brother's," Frank said. "Died in Fallujah. Held that line like it was made of stone." Sam didn't say anything. He just placed a hand over the flag and nodded slowly, the kind of gesture that says, "I understand in a way no words can." News of Sam spread slowly. The regulars started to ask about the man in the back. The ones who once ignored him began to notice. A local reporter dropped in one morning and asked to interview him. Sam declined, not out of pride, but because he said it wasn't about him. It never was. It was about the ones who didn't come home, about the promises broken when the country forgets. Emily gave the reporter a statement instead, said he was a good man who deserved peace. That was all. A few days later, something unexpected happened. The mayor came in, not for a photo op, not with cameras, just with a veteran affairs officer, and a handwritten letter. They asked to speak to Sam. He agreed, reluctantly. They talked for over an hour behind the closed door of the back room. When they left, Sam said nothing. But that night, Emily noticed his backpack was a little lighter, and the medals weren't in it anymore. He'd placed them in a small wooden box on the shelf above the cot. On top of them, folded carefully, was the old black-and-white photo of his unit. The following week, the town hosted its annual community dinner at the firehouse. Usually it was a quiet affair. This time, Frank made a call, asked if Sam could be the guest of honor. The idea was met with silence at first, then agreement, then action. Flyers went up. Emily helped design them. She used the photo of the 5 men, not Sam alone. He liked that. Said it was the only way he'd go. The night of the event, Sam shaved. Not all the beard, just enough to see his jaw again. He wore his old uniform jacket, pressed and patched. Frank picked him up and walked him in, hand on his shoulder. The firehouse was packed, more than usual. Kids, families, older vets, some who hadn't left their houses in years. There was applause, quiet and respectful. Sam didn't speak at first. He stood there, eyes scanning the room, then looked at the picture projected on the wall behind him. Finally, he spoke. "I didn't come here to be seen. I came because I was tired. Tired of running from memories. Tired of pretending I didn't matter. Tired of trying to remember what silence used to feel like. I don't need awards. I don't need speeches. I just needed to know someone still gives a damn. That's it. That's all any of us ever needed." The room was still. Not even the kids moved. Frank stepped up next to him and raised a toast. To those who came home, and to those who brought them back. The crowd raised their glasses. Sam sat down slowly. One hand on his cane, the other resting lightly over his chest where his medals used to be. That night he didn't return to the back room. Frank took him home instead, made up a guest room, said it was just for a night. Sam stayed 3. The town changed after that, not overnight, not with headlines, but in small, steady ways. The shelter got more volunteers. The diner saw more veterans stop in and stay. Emily started a donations jar on the counter labeled in memory of Ray, Booker, Luis, and Kenny. No one questioned it. They just filled it. Sam still came by, still sat in the corner booth sometimes, still ordered his coffee black. But he walked straighter now, spoke a little more, laughed once in a while, and when he looked out the window, his eyes no longer searched the streets for ghosts. The diner smelled like cinnamon and bacon. The griddle hissed, the coffee bubbled, and the sky outside burned orange with the first hints of sunrise. Emily unlocked the door as she always did, flipping the sign, from closed to open, expecting the morning to flow like clockwork. But something felt different. Not wrong, just heavier, like the air was waiting. She turned on the lights, straightened the chairs, and checked the back room. But the cot was empty. The coat rack stood bare. The wooden box on the shelf was gone. Only a folded napkin sat where the medals had been. On it, one sentence written in sharp, deliberate pen, "Thank you for seeing me." Panic didn't come immediately. Confusion came first, followed by a slow rush of dread. She called Frank. He answered before the first ring finished. "Already on it," he said. "Come outside." She stepped onto the sidewalk and saw him waiting by his truck across the street. In the passenger seat, Samuel Harris sat upright, dressed in full uniform. Clean, pressed, boots shined, the beard remained, now combed and trimmed with care. His eyes were steady, clearer than she had ever seen. He didn't wave, just nodded once, then turned forward again. Frank explained it quickly. Sam had asked him for one favor, one last ride, not to the VA, not to a shelter, not even to a hospital. He wanted to visit the cemetery, not to lie down, not yet, just to visit the men he once led. Just to stand one more time where the names carved into stone lined up like soldiers still waiting for orders. Frank respected it. He drove him himself. Emily didn't argue. She just nodded, eyes burning, and pressed a paper bag of fresh biscuits into Frank's hand. "Tell him I said breakfast is always waiting." Frank smiled, just a little, and drove away. The cemetery was quiet, just the wind and the rustle of leaves, no footsteps but theirs. Sam walked slow, cane in hand, stopping every few steps to read a name aloud under his breath. He paused longest, at 4 stones in a row. Ray, Booker, Luis, Kenny. Each name etched clean, each flag still standing. He reached into his coat and pulled out 4 ribbons, each, wrapped in cloth. One by one, he laid them at the base of each grave, bending slowly, deliberately. like he was folding time itself. Frank watched from a distance. He didn't interrupt, didn't follow, just gave the man his moment. When Sam finally turned around, his face was unreadable, but his posture had changed. He looked lighter somehow, like the years had shifted off his shoulders if only for a while. They rode back in silence. The sun rose higher. The town started to stir. But Sam didn't return to the diner. Not that day, not the next. A week passed. Then 2. Emily called Frank every other morning. Same answer. No sign, no noise, just waiting. Then one morning, just before open, the bell above the diner door rang without her touching it. A man stepped in holding a sealed envelope and a small wooden box. He looked young, maybe 30, dressed in jeans and a flannel shirt, hat in hand. He said his name was Thomas Harris, Sam's son. Emily's breath caught. She hadn't known he had family. Thomas explained it all. They hadn't spoken in years, not because of anger, just distance, silence that grew too wide to cross. But then a letter came from Sam, short, honest, written in clean block letters. Thomas drove across, 3 states to see him. They spent 2 nights together, talked more in those hours than they had in 20 years. Sam had given him the medals, the box, and a request. Give this to the diner girl with the soft eyes. She saved my life and probably doesn't even know it. Emily opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a photo. The 5 men again, same muddy smiles. But this time, someone had drawn a 6th figure standing beside them, a woman in an apron holding a coffee pot. Below the image, handwritten in ink, were 4 words. "Thank you for remembering me," she cried. Quietly, without shame, letting it all pour out behind the counter as the first customers started to file in. Frank came later. Thomas shook his hand, said his father spoke of him often. Then they sat, the 3 of them, in the booth by the window, Sam's booth, and watched the morning unfold. Sam was gone, but not in the way that hurt. He had left on his own terms, with peace, with dignity, with people who saw him, who remembered him, who made space for him in a world that too often forgets the ones who carried its burdens long before the rest of us opened our eyes. And every morning after that, Emily poured 1 extra cup of coffee. Black, no sugar. She set it on the counter, beside the register. Not for a customer, not for the show, but because some ghosts don't haunt. They sit quietly and remind you that honor never fades when someone chooses to remember. Some stories don't end with applause. They don't wrap themselves in perfect closure or ride off into sunsets. Some stories just settle into your bones, quietly, like a truth you didn't know you needed. Samuel Harris didn't ask for recognition. He didn't chase honor. He had already lived it, in the dirt, in the silence, in the years he spent being invisible to the very country he once defended with his life. But the smallest things brought him back. A cup of coffee, a warm corner, a voice that didn't speak out of duty, but out of care. And when a town paused, just long enough to see him, everything changed. Not just for him, but for everyone who thought they understood what sacrifice looked like. That booth by the window still stands. Emily keeps it clean. Frank checks it when he walks in. Sometimes new veterans sit there, and when they ask why that spot matters, she tells them the story. Not to glorify it, not to make anyone a hero, but to remind them, and herself, that respect isn't earned in the way people think. It's owed, always has been. We forget sometimes that the war doesn't end when the uniform comes off, that the real battles begin in silence, in memory, in the spaces between footsteps and handshakes. But maybe, just maybe, if we listen a little more, if we look a little closer, we'll realize that some of the strongest people among us are just waiting for someone to see them. And maybe the greatest honor we can give is never letting them be forgotten.